With the two remaining Game of Thrones books drifting endlessly somewhere in purgatory, and Season 7 releasing in July, I figure it's time for me to get my theory out there. Actually, I meant to do it ages ago, but procrastination got the better of me, something that I'm sure George R.R. Martin can relate to. When I say my theory, I'm not actually talking about the obvious ones, like that Jon Snow is actually a Targaryen and that Daenerys' three dragons represent Daenerys, her nephew, and Jon. That's more on the book side of things. My theory is less significant in terms of potential outcome of the series, but I think it's a huge part of why everything happened the way that it did in the first place. Forgive me if I get anything wrong, or if I mix up some details between the TV show and the novels. I started reading the books after I fell in love with Season 1, so they kind of are in some cases interchangeable in my mind. Besides, some of the minor details I might make a mistake on in this explanation will be irrelevant to my theory. So let's get to it. I'll go ahead and say spoilers because I'm convinced I'm right, but I could easily be wrong about everything, so my theory is that Peter Baelish, also known as Littlefinger, the man who will fuck his enemies, is the biological father of both Robb and Sansa Stark. Peter grew up with the Tullys, where he became very close with the two sisters. He says early on that he banged both of them, but as readers or viewers, we assume that he's lying. Until we find out that he did in fact bang Lysa, the crazier one. So either he's 50% lying or he's 100% telling the truth. We know that he attempted to duel Brandon Stark, who was at that time betrothed to Catelyn Tully, but lost and was nearly killed. To quote Littlefinger from the show, "You know what I learned losing that duel? I learned that I'll never win, not that way. That's their game, their rules. I'm not going to fight them, I'm going to fuck them. That's what I know. That's what I am. And only by admitting what we are can we get what we want." This is the moment when he started planning his vengeance. If my memory serves, he went back to his lands and plotted away. It's during this time that I believe he masterminded every single major event that has happened in the series. So let's start from the beginning. Lyanna Stark is betrothed to Robert Baratheon, but fell in love with Prince Rhaegar, and they run away together. This prompts the hot-headed Brandon Stark to race down to King's Landing with his father to demand her return. But you're probably thinking, demand for her return if she left on her own accord? What sense does that make? This is where Peter Baelish comes in. In his plotting, he anonymously sent ravens out to provoke a war. He knew full well just how hot-headed Brandon Stark was, and I think even Ned remarks on his brother's anger. Lord Stark and his son are brutally murdered by the Mad King, who had been sinking deeper and deeper into insanity, and a war breaks out. It's during this time that Peter returns to Riverrun to comfort Catelyn in her grief after losing her betrothed, although she didn't really know him that well. But she was young. I believe he ends up bedding her and impregnating her. I believe this could be why her marriage to Ned is rushed, although I lean towards Hoster Tully, who is her father, not knowing she's pregnant because of something that he says on his deathbed later, which is, "Tansy, forgive me. The blood, oh please, Tansy. Dead. You'll have others, sweet babies and trueborn. Be a good wife, and the gods will bless you, sons, trueborn sons." Catelyn apparently remembers this as Lysa getting impregnated before her marriage to Jon Arryn. And I'm a bit conflicted here. If Hoster didn't know that Catelyn was pregnant, then it could be a coincidence that the marriage is rushed. However, I think Catelyn has emotional problems and forgets the bad things that she does. More on this later. On their wedding night, Ned beds Catelyn and thinks he impregnates her. However, she's already pregnant with Peter's child, Robb. Ned goes off to war and comes back with the baby boy. Obvious Stark features. It's widely accepted that Jon is Lyanna's and Rhaegar's son. Lyanna is a Stark, black hair and other Stark features, and Rhaegar is Targaryen, white hair and other Targaryen features. Yet it's the strong Stark genes that Jon takes after, making it easy for Ned to claim Jon as his own to protect him from Robert's wrath. Well, then we get to Robb. Robb Stark has auburn hair, like his mother. So what does Catelyn do when Ned returns with his bastard son? She does what any crazy Tully sister would do, bang Peter Baelish. Then you have Sansa Stark, who also has auburn hair, like her mother. I said earlier that I think Catelyn conveniently forgets or convinces herself that she's perfect. Why else would she get mad about Jon when she knows that Robb isn't hers? Although it's possible that she's not certain that Robb isn't hers. Maybe she didn't really understand how babies were made. Because back when she was betrothed to Brandon Stark, she was very young, kind of girlish. So it's possible that Peter Baelish convinced her that she wouldn't get pregnant the first time or something, or maybe she just didn't really get it. This could explain her anger about Jon, and also why she would turn to Peter Baelish after she felt betrayed. I'm not sure if the books or the show really go into detail about it, though. Either way, Robb and Sansa both take after their mother, and not Ned, while Jon takes after his mother, who is a Stark. And next in the Stark family, you have Bran, Arya, and Rickon, all of whom take after Ned and the other Starks. Interestingly, all the legitimate Stark children are still alive, except in the show where Rickon gets fucked. So what evidence do I have that Robb and Sansa are Baelishes? Well, besides the subtle message in the series being all about the kids, which you have young Rhaegar and Lyanna running away together and having Jon, the whole Cersei and Jaime thing, and Ned getting killed to protect Cersei's kids, and finally Robb and Sansa being Peter's kids, probably. There is the part that all Starks are wargs, which I think George R. R. Martin has actually been quoted as saying. So in the first book and season 1, the Stark kids all get direwolves, and what almost immediately happens to Sansa's wolf? Well, it gets killed by Robert. Well, technically it gets killed by Cersei, but I think Robert gave the order because, he's king, well, was king. We never see if Sansa is able to warg into her direwolf or not. We know that Rickon, Arya, Bran, and Jon can control their direwolves, but what about Robb? We occasionally hear some dialogue from, side characters just talking to one another. There's a part where some people are talking about how ferocious Robb and his direwolf are in battle, and that he and his wolf work together as if they are one, and I think this is meant to kind of throw the readers/viewers off into thinking that, obviously Robb and his direwolf move as one, because they are one. But I think it's more of a testament to how intelligent direwolves are. So in the book, we never actually get to read a chapter from Robb's perspective, and this is how George gets around Robb not actually being a warg. And then what happens? He gets brutally murdered by the Freys. We're left saddened because we originally, at least at the time, we thought that Robb was a Stark and the Starks were falling apart, with Ned's death and whatnot. But I think this is actually why Robb is murdered so easily. I mean, in terms of writing, it's easy to think that George kills his characters off willy-nilly. By everything, I mean every death. And I think that there's a story arc that spans over all the books, and that Jon and Daenerys are the two main characters, while every other seemingly main character is really just a well-developed supporting character. So what about Sansa? She's still alive. What does she do? Well, she eventually goes to live with Peter Baelish, where she pretends to be his bastard child. Ironically, she is his bastard child, whom he tries to fuck, which is pretty weird. So that's my theory, which is basically that the war and all the deaths took place because Peter Baelish lost a duel. I think that if Peter Baelish was the only person who was, particularly good at manipulating people, individuals, and groups, I think that he would get everything that he wanted in the story. But you have characters like Varys that are equally good and are fighting on the exact opposite side.